quoting a price, again loudly, at the beginning of the game. This presented a new, potentially profitable strategy. If I had a high card, I would begin the game by calling out a low price. This is a relatively simple bluff, indicating that I have a low card to bring the overall price down, so that I can then go on to buy at a low level from a variety of players, since everyone has stuck to my initial low price. The risk of this, of course, would be that other participants would realize I was bluffing, simply buy from me at a low price, and continue trading at a high price. I was counting here on that relatively simple message that had been taught to me some weeks before by my friend Sagar Malde. Rich people expect poor people to be stupid. If someone who looks like me and talks like me starts the game by loudly declaring what sounds like an excessively low price, the other players are more likely to read it as a simpleton revealing his hand cheaply than any kind of complicated bluff. After that, the plan was to simply ask others for prices incessantly in order to work out their own strategy and their hands. Here I was relying on another piece of information that I had gleaned from the LSE players. Most of these guys were not counting on winning the tournament, but were hoping to use the final as a networking opportunity. Given this, most players could be trusted upon to employ a relatively simplistic strategy. Quote slightly higher than the average if they had a high card, slightly lower if they had a low one. Some might quote a neutral price so as not to reveal information, but that was rare. Very few would ever bluff. Remember, these guys are economics students. They're not poker players. The key takeaway here is that economics nowadays are ultimately... Let's fix that. The key not poker players. Shifty. Guys are economics students. They're not poker players. The key takeaway here is that economists nowadays are ultimately mathematicians, not great thinkers or game players. The other students were playing through calculators, and while they were playing through their calculators, I was guiding their ears and reading their eyes. Start with a loud bluff, then rapidly assess every other player's intelligence, level of complexity, and likely card. Once that was established, I'd decide whether I wanted to buy, bet the total would be high, or sell, bet the total would be low. If I was a buyer, I guided the price down by loudly quoting low prices, while actively buying from other players at that low level. If I was a seller, I did the opposite. The strategy worked to perfection, and after the first 5 games, I was put through to the big final, the final of the final. Only 5 players now, 1 internship on the line. That's good odds. As the 5 of us moved to the central table, the eliminated competitors grabbed canapes and gathered round to watch. I sized up the players around me. I had played most of them in the games leading up to this final. They were all good, quick to pick up on price movements, and well aware of the maths in the background. But none of them, I thought, had been smart enough to bluff or read bluffing. I figured my chances were good. The cards came round, and mine was a -10. This is a good card. The -10 is the furthest card from the average, which means it has the most power to change the total of the game. But of course, it's only of value if other people don't realize you've got it. Otherwise, they'll immediately start lowering their own prices, and you'll have no way to profit from it. This is another general rule of trading. You don't necessarily make money by being right, but by being right when others are wrong. I stuck to my usual strategy and immediately declared a high price. If I could establish a high price across the game, then I would hopefully be able to sell at high prices continuously, making the most of my -10 card. Surprisingly, the first player did not sell to me, despite my high price. I asked him his price in return. It was even higher. He's giving his game away, surely. He's got a high card. I asked the other 3 players. All were quoting high prices. Everyone had reasonably high cards, it seemed. That meant we were going to have a high total, not accounting for my -10. So for me to make any profit, I would have to push the price up. I started quoting higher and higher and louder until finally people started selling to me. I was able to push the price a bit higher still and then started selling hard. At this kind of price, and with the -10 in my hand, it was almost impossible to lose. The trick was to quote my own prices higher and loud, pushing the market up as if I were an aggressive buyer, but to actually sell when asking prices from the other players. In the chaos and noise of the game, the other players weren't able to keep track of who was buying and selling from their own quoted prices, but the continually repeated numbers being quoted had a strong power to influence the price. I started to stack up a lot of sell bets, confident that it was a near certainty at this price that the end total would be far lower. The time came to turn over for the first of the 3 central cards. It was a 13. A 13 was not good for me, significantly higher than the average card value of 7.65. It drags up the expected total of the cards by about 3 points. With a significant number of sell bets on my scorecard, this wasn't good news. Still, I had the -10 in my hand, which nobody knew about, and the prices were high. The maths was all well in my favor. I used the opportunity to ramp the price up even further and continued to sell. By the time the second card went over, I had used up 2 full scorecards of sell bets. The second card was a 14. I should maybe have been suspicious at this point, but I wasn't. Besides, I didn't have time to be. I needed the total to be low, or that was my career down the drain. And if it wasn't going to be low, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I ramped the price up and started selling even more aggressively at an even higher price. By the end of the game, I had racked up about 300 sells. The final card went over. It was a 20. The 4 other players turned their cards over. 10, 11, 12, 15. It was impossible. With the exception of my single -10 card, the other cards were the 7 highest possible cards in the game. The odds of that happening by chance are 1 in 11,440. 0.0087%. The game had been fixed. I didn't know how to deal with this situation. For just a moment, my blood ran cold. The crowd loved it. The other players were, of course, delighted. I had made so many sells that their scorecards were all, inevitably, a litany of buys. And the price, in the end, was super high. Who rigged the game? Why? What could this mean? The table disbanded as the traders and other Citigroup staff members convened in the back of the room to count up the scores. The players all melted into the crowd. "I'm sorry, mate." That was Matic, his hand on my shoulder. That was unlucky, mate. You did your best. I'm not sure what I said then, to Matic. Maybe I just said nothing at all. For 5 minutes, the room seemed to be melting. I found I had a flute of champagne in my hand, with those little bubbles that keep coming out of nowhere and flying upward and never seem to run out. What just happened? Who did this? Why would they cheat me? Shortly after, the trader strode into the center of the room, his huge presence immediately silencing the crowd. A space opened up around him. "I would like to thank you all for playing," he called out, and his loud American voice brought me back to the room. "We've calculated the scores, and I can announce the winner." I don't remember anyone's score exactly, but mine was less than minus 1,000. That's not good. The truth is, I wasn't embarrassed. If you don't shoot, you don't score, you know? After reading out the scores, the heavyset trader announced the winner. And the name that he called out was mine. I was the winner. It was me. I stepped forward in a daze. The trader addressed the crowd as he shook my hand. Gary's scores in the warm-up games were so far ahead of any other player that we decided to test him. We wanted to see how he reacted when every single thing turned against him. So we rigged the game. It's important to know whether a trader will back himself or back down. Gary, you backed yourself, and we like to see that. Well done. The trader reached his huge hand out to me once again, and I took it. "I'm Caleb Zuckman. I'll see you on the desk." It was cold that night, but I went to the park with my friends, drinking. I got very drunk, so I can't really remember much of what happened. But one memory has stayed with me clearly. It is a memory of me moving very quickly so that the cold air was rushing across my face. In that memory, I am clutching a friend by the shoulders. "I'm going to be a millionaire!" I am shouting. I am screaming in his face, and he's laughing. "I'm going to be a millionaire!" Three. One morning in early March 2007, I woke before the sun came up. We didn't used to have a shower in my mom and dad's house. We had this little rubber hose that you can still buy from Argos for £6. I plugged it into the taps and I showered myself, setting on the cold, early morning plastic of the bathtub. My dad knocked on the bathroom door before I was finished. He used to start work early too. I pulled out those old DFS clothes, dark blue shirt, fat blue and yellow tie, wrapped it all up in some cheap, black, ill-fitting suit from Next, or something, and I gelled up my hair. Then I left. It was still dark at that time. I grew up in Ilford, but the closest station used to be called Seven Kings. In winter, before the sun comes up, the early morning commuters all stand there in the dark and they shiver as they wait for the train. Their breaths are all white in the air. This was the train that used to run through my bedroom. I tried to look for my window, but I missed it. Change at Stratford, onto the Jubilee line. Again, that looping, winding, whirring sound, and the train dives underground, heading forward now into the wharf. On that day, in March 2007, I was still only 20, and the sound hit me different. That day, it sounded like the future. The train plunges underground before it reaches Canary Wharf Station. Those stations were all brand new back then, and Canary Wharf's was huge and so spacious, with this crazy high ceiling like an underground cathedral. You could tell it was all bank workers filing off the trains and along the platforms. Expensive, anonymous haircuts. Expensive, anonymous shirts. They snaked across the station in long, straight lines, heading for the exits. I cut into a line and snaked with them. Out of the station and toward the building, and I see it now in the first light of dawn, the Citigroup Center, a 42-story skyscraper in gunmetal gray steel and glass that sets on the southern point of a triangle of skyscrapers in the center of Canary Wharf. At that time, the top of the building sported the word Citigroup in huge red glowing letters, with a little red umbrella glowing alongside. For some reason, and I don't know why, thick white steam emanates from the tops of the buildings in the mornings and the evenings in winter. The tube station has these 4 long escalators that flow upward into a huge circular glowing opening hanging above them, so that when you are leaving the station, it feels like you are boarding a spaceship or something. And then, when you come out, you are in a broad, open plaza with trees and with water, but with more, so much more than anything. These giant gray columns of metal soaring upward, spilling their steam to the navy blue clouds. Across the streets now, to the building, the wind whips between the skyscrapers, and by the time I reach the vast, warm, brightly lit reception of the Citigroup building, it felt like a sanctuary. Inside there, it was all expensive-looking furniture, colorful abstract art, and impossibly well-ironed staff. A soft-focus receptionist sent me over to a soft-focus sofa, and I sat down, adjusting my tie. A kindly-looking lady called Stephanie turned up and handed me a visitor's pass. She walked me through a set of security gates and around one corner into what seemed... I messed that part up. One corner. Okay. She walked me through a set of security gates and around one corner, and into what seemed to me to be the world's largest atrium, all escalators and glass. This was a whole new building now, and I could see all the way to the roof, which must have been 20 floors above me. At each level, huge, brightly lit rooms looked out on 2 sides through thick walls made of windows onto a vast, tall, and wide empty space, at the bottom of which I was standing, looking up. Glass and metal walkways and balconies branched out at intervals, connecting offices across the divide. I didn't know about it at that time, but less than 1 year earlier, a Citigroup employee had committed suicide by jumping all the way through that central space. He'd fallen 20 floors without even going outside. Some of the traders had gone out onto the balconies to look down. So it goes, I guess. Stephanie led me up 3 flights of escalators to the glass walkways of the 2nd floor. Etched in crystal white onto the vast glass doors were the words, "Fixed Income Trading Floor." Words which meant nothing to me. I would spend 4 years of my life on that floor. The trading floor itself is a vast room. Entering from the middle, the room seems to spread for 50 meters in every direction. To my left, to my right, and out in front. The thing that jumps out straight away is the monitors. Each trader has 8, 9, 10, even 12 monitors rising up in a huge square or rectangle in front of them. Row upon row upon row of traders, each craning upward to look at these monitor walls above and around them, enveloping them. The traders set back to back in long rows, mirroring the long strip lighting hanging down from the ceiling above them, each arching up into their screens. The walls to the outside are floor-to-ceiling glass windows, although from where I'm stood, just inside the door, those windows seemed a long way away. Wide, black digital signboards hang at intervals from the ceiling, displaying the time in different cities throughout the world: London, New York, Sydney, Tokyo. Beneath their banks of screens, each trader has a huge, heavy black speaker box, about a meter wide, covered in buttons and dials and switches. Later in the morning, the room would fill with an ever-rising crescendo of noises from those speaker boxes, pings and bleeps and cachings and shouted numbers. But from where I am, about 7:30 in the morning, the noise was peculiarly calm. The loudest thing was the buzz of the strip lights. Beneath that, a low hum of voices. Stephanie led me round to the right of the trading floor for some distance, and then cut left into one of the aisles that separated the rows. We were moving forward now, into the heart of the trading floor, and to either side of me, I could look along the long rows of back-to-back traders as we walked. White shirt, light pink shirt, white shirt. So this is what traders look like, I thought. We started to move into a section of the trading floor that was noisier. The mismatched melody of electronic signals and warnings and loud human laughing and shouting of numbers that would eventually become the music of my life. I looked around as the noise started rising, and Stephanie cut right onto one of these desks. We were walking directly between traders now, through the thin space between traders' backs. The noises were getting louder and louder, and I could see the multicolored numbers flashing on the huge walls of screens. This desk, far in the back corner of the trading floor, was buttressed on the far end by a vast window, and I could see out of it onto the station, and the trees and the water in the plaza, and I could see the sun starting to rise. Stephanie stopped and bent her knees slightly, and leaned into the vast, hulking back of a trader and said something very gently into his ear. And the trader pushed with his arms against the desk edge, and his office chair kicked 2 feet back and spun around, and he stood up, huge now, between me and the window. And he was so backlit against the brightness of the sun through that window that I could barely make out his huge, beaming smile. But I knew it was Caleb, and I took once again his huge, outstretched hand as it reached out downward to me. "Hi, Gary. Welcome to the Sturt desk." 4. Stephanie was gone now. I hadn't noticed her going, but she was definitely gone, and I was standing, squinting upward, in Caleb's shadow. With a heavy hand on my shoulder, Caleb walked me away from the window and back toward the central aisle of the trading floor. The Sturt desk had about 10 traders in total, seated back to back, either side of us as we walked, and Caleb gestured to each of them as we walked past. "This is Bill. He trades sterling. This is JB. He trades Aussie, Kiwi, Yen. This is Wheelie. He trades Scandus." In most of these cases, I had no real idea what the brief description meant. Not one of the traders spoke to me as I walked past. A couple of them jerked their heads around, almost instinctively, upon hearing their names, only to quickly turn back. Each of them was deeply involved in the flashing lights and sounds rolling out of their station. One of them wrapped around a thick, heavy brown hand phone, another shouting numbers into his huge speaker box. Caleb stopped at the very end of the row. There, half falling into the central aisle and separated from the rest of the traders by an empty space, sat the man, or perhaps more of a boy in hindsight, who would be my first ever direct senior in trading. Snoopy! Caleb shouted loudly, and Snoopy turned with a start. No sooner had he turned than he was up on his feet and wiping his hands on the front of his trousers. He was, I was thankful to notice immediately, the size of an ordinary man, only a couple of inches taller than me. He introduced himself while shaking my hand and smiling and nodding. His real name, it turned out, was not Snoopy, but Sundeep. For some reason, after introducing himself to me, he then turned and shook Caleb's hand as well, still smiling and nodding the whole time. With no more than that, Caleb was gone, as quickly as Stephanie, and I was left, then, just me and Sundeep. Notwithstanding my lack of direction or instruction, Sundeep, too, was very quickly away from me and back inside his wall of screens. And there I was, standing alone, at the edge of the desk, and it was not immediately clear what I was supposed to be doing, or in fact, where I was supposed to set. But that was okay. I had been told about this. I had been warned. This was the nothing. I'd heard clusters of Pakistani Finance Society members talking about it while filling in application forms in large huddles in the LSE library. You fill in 35 application forms, you write 35 cover letters, you memorize the meanings of about 100 acronyms, and you do 20 or 30 interviews. Then, when you finally walk onto your first trading floor to start your first internship, absolutely roaring with enthusiasm to meet your first team and to make your first $1 million, you get given nothing. No work today, no clear instruction, no obvious job. And in many cases, such as mine now, also no seat. When you're an intern, the job doesn't get given to you. It's your job to make the job yours. You make your own money on the trading floor, I guess. There was an empty seat and an entire station of computers and monitors free to Snoopy's left. But for all I knew, that could be someone's. So I went and took an empty chair from somewhere else on the trading floor when no one was looking and rolled it over to Snoopy's right, in front of a small filing cabinet. I was half leaning into the central aisle from this position, but I could see all the things that I needed to. Snoopy's screen just in front of me, and the whole desk of traders to my left. It would be my job to keep an eye on the traders and subtly notice when someone wasn't busy so I could sneak in and talk to them. I could also use the filing cabinet as a kind of makeshift desk. I ripped a sheet of paper out of my notepad and drew a little diagram, writing as much as I could remember of the traders, their names, their roles, and where they sat. I showed it to Snoopy and asked him if it was right. He thought that was pretty funny and made a few corrections. I placed it on the filing cabinet in front of me and made a clean copy on another sheet of paper. I folded that one up and put it in my pocket. Snoopy was clearly, without a doubt, the desk junior. He couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years older than I was. Every single other trader on the desk looked at least 7 or 8 years older than him. I tried a couple times to lean into Snoopy's peripheral vision and ask him about what he was doing, but each time he smiled sheepishly and palmed me off. He had the look of a boy copying someone's homework. I liked him immediately. But it was patently clear both to me and to Snoopy that my future would not be in his hands. He knew it. I knew it. He knew I knew it. I would have to look for bigger fish. I turned to my left and looked at the members of the Sturt desk. Even to my young, untrained eyes, they had the air of a ramshackle mob. In the far corner, behind Caleb, and next to the window sat a small, middle-aged man. white-haired, near spherical, and hobbit-like. He sat too small in his wobbling office chair, typing furiously with one of those huge brown phones clamped hard between his ear and left shoulder, head cocked to the left. He angled himself away from the desk, toward the window, and occasionally cast suspicious glances backward toward the other traders, as if wary of being caught. Another middle-aged man, tall, wiry, red-faced, and completely bald, stood chairless, one pink shirt tail flapping erratically, leaning into his computers, shouting and swearing into the screens in a broad Australian drawl. A swarthy Italian 3 seats down from me sat in a crumpled, expensive-looking shirt, laughing deeply into his headset. He looked like he'd not been to sleep. Even Caleb, so effortlessly, milkily smooth and charming at the trading game, looked older, less polished, talking amiably on the phone in his oversized American suit. This was not actually my first ever time on the trading floor. The prize for winning the trading game had been 2 one-week internships, of which this was the second. The game now was to turn those 2 weeks into the summer internship, and then turn that into a job. I'd spent my first week, the previous December, on the credit trading desk, approximately 1 year and 10 months before that precise desk would blow up the world economy. Of course, I had not known about the impending death of the world economy at that time, nor did I know of it now, 3 months later, as I sat falling off the corner of the STIRT desk, wondering what it was that STIRT actually stood for, and why the traders here looked so different to those credit traders on the other side of this room. The credit traders had been like the LSE students. Polished, starched, uniformed, smooth. The STIRT traders, well, they were not that. They had accents, real accents, from real places. I liked that. I also wondered why. But this was no time for sociological analysis. Time was ticking. I needed a mark. The choice, at least, could not have been simpler. Whilst most of the traders were absorbed in their screens or their telephones, wiry, bald head, red-faced pink shirt was a locus of skittish activity, shouting snippets of jokes into his speaker boxes, hollering things I didn't understand, traders on other desks, over the walls of screens, slapping other traders on the back unexpectedly. Ever standing, ever moving. He seemed dying to be bothered. I pulled the slip of paper out of my pocket and checked it. JB, Aussie, Kiwi, Yen, whatever that meant. I got myself behind him and to his right as he was standing, so that I could peek gently into his peripheral vision. In his whirl of noise and motion, he seemed not to notice me at all. I leaned in. JB? JB stopped sharp, like he'd sighted an animal, and stared headlong into the distance through his screens for at least 5 or 6 seconds. All of a sudden, he whipped his head round rapidly to the right, where I was standing, then to the left, then to the right again. I was honestly not sure if it was a skit or if he had genuinely not seen me. No one else looked away from their screens. JB, I said again, and JB slowly lowered his gaze to me. I looked upward at JB. JB looked downward at me. Hi, JB. My name's Gary, I said, a little stutteringly, as I put out my hand. JB looked at my hand, for longer, I felt, than really he should have done. He looked again, back at my face. My hand had been out for a while now, and I looked and turned back at JB. His face had, for whatever reason, remained a vision of shock this whole time. And then, suddenly, that face was beaming. He whipped my hand round as it was taking... Ah, man, I messed up. I was on a roll there. Okay. Let's see where I got, where I was at. He whipped my hand round as it was taking... Let's start from there. His face was beaming. His face was beaming. That's the last thing I got right. His face was beaming. Where was that at? And then suddenly that face was beaming. He whipped my hand round. And then suddenly that face was beaming. Is that what I said? Let's see. And then suddenly that face was beaming. He whipped my hand round as it was taking... Yeah, that face was beaming. Okay, here we go. All right, back into it. Back into it, Gary. Here we go. This looks like it's about to get fun. Oh, got to click in it. Am I hitting the wrong one? Yep. Whole time. And then, suddenly, that face was beaming. He whipped my hand round as if taking it off. Fucking oath, mate! Where the fuck did you get that tie? I looked down at my tie. Blue, fat, yellow stripes. JB's hand was still squeezing my hand. I'm not sure, mate. I think it's from Next? JB waved a beckoning hand, which I took to mean to bring my chair over. So I rolled across, perched next to his filing cabinet, and leaned in to look at his screens. The flashing lines and numbers could have been the betting markets for the horses, for all I knew at that time. In hindsight, at least one of them probably was. With my arrival, JB seemed to have immediately lost interest in those flashing numbers and made a half-turn toward me. From this position, talking over his right shoulder to me 1 second and shouting back over his left shoulder into his computers the next, JB conducted a surprisingly personal interview. JB wanted to know where I came from and what the hell I was doing on the desk. He wanted to know what football team I supported, and took a surprising interest in the provenance of my clothes. At the time, this behavior was confusing to me. My previous stint on the trading floor had consisted largely of uninspiring spreadsheet work and somewhat turgid explanations of credit default swaps. No one had ever asked where my tie was from. It is only looking back now, with the benefit of 6 years working on trading floors, that I can see how eminently sensible Johnny's, JB's full name was Johnny Blackstone, questions actually were. 20-year-old kids do not, in general, just rock up onto the trading floor. Especially not 20-year-old kids who, as in my case, look and are dressed as if they have been sent by their parents to the local estate agents to ask for work experience. The only 20-year-old kids you will find on the trading floor are those whose parents run the trading floor. Those people neither sound nor look like me. JB was, I think, amused and intrigued. Looking back, I think I would have been too. JB was delighted to find out that I was from Ilford, after figuring out that it was, at least in some senses, in Essex. JB's girlfriend and, apparently, many of his brokers, whatever a broker was, were also from Essex. He pressed down one of the million switches on the big black box under his monitors and asked a mystery person if they'd ever been to Ilford. A deep Cockney voice from the pub boomed back. "Oh yeah, Ilford. Used to go down Ilford Place all the time when I was younger. All changed down there now, though. All changed." JB was even more delighted to find out I supported Leyton Orient. "Orient!" he shouted out, as if he'd never pronounced the letter O before. He called me Orient for the rest of the week. JB told me everything about his background. He'd moved to England 20 years previously to study law at Oxford. From his accent, I wouldn't have guessed that he'd been outside of Queensland for much more than a day. He'd hated law, so had dropped out to play rugby for London Irish. From there, he had gone into broking, and from there, into trading. This was not, of course, the traditional LSE-style pipeline involving writing 35 CVs and cover letters while inverting matrices. Something was afoot here, I suspected. But again, there was not really time to get into it. JB also, finally, told me what STIRT, S-T-I-R-T, stood for, which was short-term interest rates trading. That was a considerable weight off of my mind. JB was once again delighted when he learned that I had won the internship in a trading game. This started him on a long monologue about trading and his journey within it, of which I did not understand much. He showed me graphs and told me many stories. I looked into Johnny's eyes. I looked at the graphs. I looked into the middle distance and thought, or at least I narrowed my eyes to give the sense of thinking. I wondered if he could tell that I didn't understand. I cannot emphasize enough how much of my early experience of trading consisted of this, of listening to traders, of nodding along sagely, of pulling the faces of a boy thinking deeply, and of understanding nothing at all. At the time, my lack of comprehension seemed to me so overwhelmingly complete, so painfully obvious, that I could not for the life of me understand how the act was not noticed. After 15 years in finance and economics, I now know why. Everyone's doing it all of the time. Anyway, I must have been good at it because my nodding was going down a storm. JB and I were getting along like a house on fire. 15 years after this conversation, as step 9 of a 12-step recovery program, in an old pub overlooking the River Thames, JB would fill in some of the gaps here as to why he took to me so quickly, and also why he used to speak so fast. At the time, I figured he was just a really nice guy, and that maybe I was just really charming. After about 2 hours of this intense conversation, JB decided it was time to pass me on. He spun his chair around so that he was blocking the central aisle and shouted unnecessarily loudly at the trader behind him, who he was now quite close to. "Hobbsy!" Hobbsy vibrated a little, then a few seconds later turned his chair around, very slowly, to face us. "Meet Gaza, Orient fan." I stood up quickly and offered a hand for Hobbsy to shake. Hobbsy didn't take my hand, but instead looked me once over, slowly, in a way that is quite simply not socially acceptable in this day and age. With him seated and me standing, hand proffered, he scanned me very slowly, from my head all the way down to my feet. At that point, he paused, perhaps thinking, and then up again to my head. After another pause, he turned back to his station and opened a tray in his filing cabinet. He took a business card out of the tray, stood up, turned around at a measured pace, and placed that card into my hand. He looked at the card. On it was printed, "Rupert Hobhouse, head of Euro Rates Trading." I looked up, over the top of the card and into the face of Rupert Hobhouse. It was only then that Rupert Hobhouse offered his own hand to me. "I'm Rupert Hobhouse," he said, "head of Euro Rates Trading." "Hi, Rupert," I said, as Rupert broke each of my knuckles. "I'm Gary." Nice to meet you. For my part, while Rupert had scanned me, I'd had much time to look at his face. It was at once babyish and concerningly stern, at once handsome and unnecessarily fat. He must have been in his early 30s. Thick, black-rimmed glasses framed his eyes beneath a professionally coiffed brown. He had the aura of a man whose parents had dropped him off unexpectedly at boarding school when he was just 6 years old and had not picked him up until he was 21. I would later find that this was not actually far from the truth. He had the muscular, verging on fat physique of a man who has been well fed for many years, possibly from birth, as if his body was struggling to come up with new ways to use all the nutrition. It was a physique that was, at certain points, straining at the seams somewhat, as was his clearly expensive shirt. It spoke of a capacity for violence. Rupert turned back without a word, and JB wandered off to the bathroom. I took this to mean that I was to sit next to Rupert. I needed only really to turn my chair around, and then I was perched looking over his shoulder. Rupert's body language did not Hey, I've done pretty good. That's the first mistake in a while. Let's see where I'm at. Looking over his shoulder. Rupert's body language did not I'm at Rupert's body language. All right, click Shift D. Really to turn my chair around, and then I was perched looking over his shoulder. Rupert's body language did not acknowledge my presence, but he immediately launched into a monologue about the nature of his work, which, given the specificities of the circumstances surrounding us at that time, could only realistically have been directed at me. The lack of eye contact spared me significant nodding, so I decided to alternate between taking notes at random and leaning forward and looking at screens. Rupert Hobhouse was, as had already been established at least 2 times, the senior euro rates trader. The euro was by far the biggest and most important currency traded on the desk, and the responsibility was split jointly, but not evenly, between him and his junior, Ho Nygien. Rupert gestured to Ho Nygien without looking, and so I turned and I looked at the guy. I recognized the name Nygien as Vietnamese, and I was wondering if he was maybe an international LSE type, but he quickly turned back to me with a big smile and said, "You all right, mate? Call me Hongo." And it turned out he was actually from Norwich. Trading Euro FX swaps, it was only at this point that I learned the primary function of the desk, trading FX swaps, foreign exchange swaps, although I had no idea what FX swaps were, involved a huge number of trades, significant risks and volumes, and constant interaction with all of Europe's biggest banks. At this point, Rupert waved toward one of his screens, on which was a long list of random words and numbers that I now know to be a trade blotter. A full itemized list of all the trades that he had done on that day. I nodded and chose a few numbers at random and jotted them onto my pad. Rupert had still not looked at me once, but in partial defense of his wholly impersonal style of communication, he and Ho, especially Ho, to be honest, did seem far more busy than JB. Other traders on the desk would shout numbers and words at them frequently, utterances which appeared to require contemplation, digestion, and response. Their various screens and speaker boxes commanded them with bleeps at regular intervals, and each bleep, it seemed, had to be picked up. Over the course of about half an hour, Rupert delivered a concise and compact philosophy of trading, generally illustrated with ever longer lists of words and colored numbers, which, whilst only slightly more intelligible than JB's explanation, was radically different in style. What for JB had been passionate and emotional, for Rupert was compulsively precise. I had no idea who was the better trader, but I could guess who made more friends in the pub. By the time it had finished, Rupert's analysis of foreign exchange swap trading left me more confused than it found me. Rupert had asked nothing about me. That was because he already knew everything about me. Or at least, he already knew everything that I had said to JB. This was somewhat disconcerting, as I'd had no idea that he, or indeed anyone, had been listening. What with the constant bleeding of speaker boxes from everyone's station, it was something of a wonder that he'd even been able to pick out my voice. Be that as it may, Rupert must have done so, for he already had most of the details. The one extra piece of information that he wanted added was, of course, what kind of school I had gone to. This was a potential tripwire for me, as I had been expelled from a grammar school for selling drugs, and the fact that I had moved from a grammar school to a comprehensive was clearly visible on my CV, which Caleb, and hence possibly Rupert, had access to. But I had prepared for exactly this question, and I told Rupert that I had left the grammar school to go to a comprehensive because I'd heard that universities had quotas for comprehensive school students. Rupert's face barely moved, but I could tell that he liked that. A thin English smile played just slightly, somewhat musically, at the corners of his tightly held lips. With my schooling covered off, Rupert moved on to the question he really wanted to ask me. It was only now that he first looked at me. He opened the top tray of his desk drawer, from where he'd extracted the business card, and drew out a pack of trading game cards. He placed them on the desk in front of me, and then, moving only above the neck, like an owl, revolved his head to face me for the first time. "Tell me how you won the trading game." The sudden eye contact, combined with the strange way of moving, caught me off guard, and for a moment, I was unable to speak. But I steadied myself and explained quickly my thinking, that the ideal strategy depended on the level of player against which one was playing, that weak players could be beaten with simple arbitrage, that the more complex players in the game were still generally uncomfortable with bluffing, and could be thrown off by aggressive loudness. Rupert watched me, unmoving, the whole time. When his computer bleeped, he ignored it. Hongo picked it up. It struck me that perhaps for some reason Rupert had chosen to forget completely all the finer and undefined spaces that exist between listening and ignoring. 1 year later, apropos of nothing, Rupert Hobhouse would take me to Las Vegas and explain to me that, with only 10 questions, he could ascertain with absolute certainty whether a woman would sleep with him or not. He never told me what those questions were. Once my explanation in the trading game was over, Rupert simply turned back to his computers and resumed his duties as if he had never moved away from them, and a heavy silence seemed to fall between us. I was still awkwardly straddling the filing cabinet to Rupert's left, which belonged to the unknown trader on the other side of me, and the complete lack of acknowledgement by anyone around me made my already ridiculous physical positioning all the more conspicuous. It was by now approaching lunchtime, so, in an attempt to assuage the awkwardness, I leaned into Rupert's peripheral vision and said, "Do you want me to go get you lunch?" Rupert did actually react physically to this one. He turned his whole body, much more naturally, with one eyebrow raised. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed me 50 pounds in cash. Yes, and get lunch for Caleb and Hongo and JB as well. I was quite relieved at this response, to be honest. I used to frequently pick up lunch orders for the sales guys at DFS, and it seemed an easy way to both be noticed and get into people's good books. I whipped round and collected everyone's orders and slipped off of the trading floor. The skyscrapers of Canary Wharf are all connected by a vast underground shopping center, which I suppose makes them all one enormous building, in a way. And as I walked through these vast, wide, artificially lit hallways, from takeaway restaurant to takeaway restaurant, I felt my sense of balance returning. Something about the conversation with Rupert, if you could call it that, had taken the air out of my lungs. I hurried back to the trading floor and wordlessly placed each trader's order on their desks beside them. When I came to Rupert, I put down his lunch, along with his change, a 10-pound note with a few coins piled on top. Rupert looked at the coins with that instinctive rapidity that people tend to show when they hear money fall to the ground. What is that? It's your change. Rupert didn't move or say anything. He was still staring at the pile of coins. I felt like maybe I'd given the wrong answer, so I tried something else. It's 11 pounds 74? I knew that it was 11 pounds 74 because I'd taken a quick note of how much everyone's order had cost, so as to make sure that Rupert got the right change. Rupert opened his top drawer and slid the money all the way across his desk and off the edge so it fell into the drawer. Then he turned to me as if he was going to confide in me, but instead looked at me with a ferocious intensity that was impossibly out of proportion with anything like the situation we were in. On this desk, we keep the change. I'd never heard such a thing in my life. The next few days fell into a pattern. I would wake up in the morning, take a shower with the rubber hose and the cold bath. I would get to the desk extremely early, increasingly early as the days went on. In fact, for reasons that I will shortly explain. Caleb had eventually taken pity on me and set me to work on some complicated and ultimately pointless spreadsheet. So I spent a few hours every morning working out how to fill an Excel sheet with pastel colors and alternating rows. Once the morning rush was over, I would set with either Rupert or JB, whoever seemed happier to acknowledge my presence. The truth was, it was always JB who seemed more keen. But I learned to gauge Rupert's subtle moods. Impressing these two would ultimately be my passport to a millionaire lifestyle, so I devoted myself to making them tick. Working with JB was easy. He just wanted an audience to listen to his stories and jokes, and in all honesty, they were usually a pleasure to listen to. He wanted to hear about life in East London and pillow fluffing at DFS and weekends with my dad watching Orient draw 0-0 with Dagenham and Redbridge away in the snow. Rupert was more complicated. I soon learned that there was nothing Rupert liked more than me being wrong. In fact, what Rupert liked was not actually me being wrong, but me being wrong and then fully and thoroughly accepting the blame for it, apologizing unreservedly and devotedly, and then gathering my reserve and staring stoically into the mid-distance, absolutely committed to becoming a better man. Rupert liked this so much that I made sure to do it frequently, and I resolved to be wrong far more than I was ever right. After a morning of this, I would offer to get lunch for everyone, it having gone down so well on my first day. Each trader would get something from a different restaurant, and making sure everyone's order was correct and, in fact, just carrying it all back to the office was no mean feat. But it was a simple way to show a basic capability and reliability, and to this day, I'm convinced that it was by far my most important role in that week on the desk. I was initially hesitant to follow Rupert's command to keep all the change, but it had been delivered with such blinding, searing intensity that I felt I simply had no choice but to do it. After a couple of days, Caleb commented that these lunches were getting expensive, with no change coming back. But when he said it, he looked round at me as if I was his firstborn son or something. And I knew then that somehow, impossibly, what I was doing must have been right. Strange crowd, this lot, I thought to myself. I was making like 20 pounds a day. Through casual conversation, I started to pick up strands of information that helped me place people on the desk. I learned that Caleb, at 28, was the youngest ever managing director. I'm almost there. Hang on. Almost got it. Fixing the part. The youngest ever managing director. Okay, let's start at the very beginning of that. On the desk. Last thing I read was on the desk. I learned that Caleb. Here we go. I started to pick up strands of information that helped me place people on the desk. I learned that Caleb, at 28, was the youngest ever managing director on the trading floor. I had no idea what a managing director was, or MD was, but it was clearly kind of a big deal, and had been transferred to be head of the London desk quite recently, after a successful career for Citi in Japan. I learned that Bill, the taciturn, silver-haired scouser in the corner, had been a big money hire from Halifax a few years previously, but, much to Rupert's chagrin and pleasure, had been completely failing to turn in the results. I also learned that, unlike all of the other traders on the desk, Bill had never been to university. Perhaps that was why he kept himself to himself. All right. Okay, everybody. There is a person behind the reading. It's me! I debated whether or not to say anything at the end of this. Hey, what's up, Grapentine? What's up, Randall? I will keep grinding. I'm going to keep grinding. I like that Gary told me in there to take my shots. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so we're taking a shot at Gary's book here, which is lighting up the world right now, climbing the charts. Love to see it. And like I said in the previous video, it's bigger than anything. So, you know, I thought in my first video I told people about me struggling and having six-figure college debts and working 3 jobs, and still I'd saved up maybe $5,000. I was pretty excited to be able to put that in some winning trades after these tariffs. It seemed to take the economy down. You want to have some money at the bottom because that's one of the only chances you get to get out of poverty is to buy in a 2008 type scenario or 1929 type scenario, 2020 type scenario. And my car broke. It's going to take probably $2,000 to fix the car. The heartbreaking situation. This happened to me in 2017. I had to cash out my investments to fix my car. And then within 3 weeks, I realized if I hadn't fixed my car and just walked for a while, I could have turned that $3,000 to fix my car into $30,000, which is a knife. But if you read Trading Wizards, the classic about trading, almost all those guys, Michael Marcus, Ed Seykota. Michael Marcus really sticks out to me because he lost it a couple times before he made it, and they've all been through tough times. There's old traders and there's bold traders, but there's very few old bold traders, as they say. But I did not say in the first video that Gary's constantly talking about how the young generation can't afford to buy a home, and I'm almost 40, and it still seems kind of like a pipe dream, you know. Try for a USDA loan, but we got to educate the public, and that's why I'm reading this book for. Try to spread the book far and wide. Someone said in the first video, why'd you put a communist logo on the thumbnail? I go, because I'm a communist, dude. I'm a Christian communist. That's the point. This is like catnip for me, this book. But yeah, I hope to be able to afford a home for my family one day. It's just so much debt. I get so many medical bills in the mail. They just keep coming forever. You know, I'm not even particularly sick. I can't imagine someone that's like seriously sick. We're paying so much of our limited income. I'm working 3 jobs, you know, with a college degree, paying off the debt for college, praying I don't get sick again, paying off the debt from getting sick. And I don't know, I'm not complaining, but I'm just giving you my background. I'm like a real world person reading this book because I was inspired, because it's my life situation, what Gary's talking about. You know, I'm one of the people out there struggling, and I want people to know about this, and Gary does too. You know, that's the point. It's political. Get Gary to 5 million subs and pressure the politicians. So if you're not subbed to Gary, it's in the description. Sub to Gary, buy his book. Someone else complained that it's not Gary reading this book. You're right. If you want to hear Gary read it, give Gary some money and listen to it on Audible. It's down below, links below. I'm not trying to take nothing away from Gary. I'm only trying to help you out, brother Gary. Brother from another mother, cut from the same cloth. Socialist, communist trader from one to another, waging in the CLASSW@R as we are, aren't we? We're supposed to educate. That's what this is all about. Educate people about the real world. If the rich want to take their money out of the country, I guess you didn't love the country, did you? I guess you don't. The poor can't. And I love when Gary's like, try that in China. What happens in China? They take it from you. That's what happens. If China can do it, so can the rest of the world. We can all do it. We just need the political will to do it. And we need a party that makes it possible to do it. So you want to leave? Be our guest. Just leave all your wealth on the way out. Have a nice trip. So I thought about not making any commentary at the end. It might help people just go to the next video better. But just know at the end of these videos, I'll always link you to the third one once I get there. And down in the description now at the top, I'll put a link to the playlist in case you somehow stumbled upon video 2. I'll put a link to the playlist with all the videos in there so you can listen all the way through them. And then I will go back at the end and make a high quality one that you can listen to all the way through. And I'll put that at the top of the playlist. And these will become like behind the scenes type videos. Okay. So if you've subbed to Gary's channel, you've bought the book, all that. If you got anything left over, you can help me out. I got a Patreon, buy me a coffee, PayPal down below, all that. If you're in the same place as me, don't worry about that at all. I'm just glad you were here and found the book, and share this with somebody else. And we got to get this message out there. Educate, agitate, tell your buddy about this book and how messed up things are, and organize. Join an organization, join a party, help out at a food bank, start a reading group, get together with other people. That's all organizing is. I never understood, but it's just getting people's numbers that agree with you and getting them together in an organization. When you need to change something politically, you can mobilize all those people. That's what organization is all about. I think ideally it's done through a party structure, a COMMUN $1 T party of the evil Santa Claus. His name's MARX. IS $T hyphen LEN number one in number one $T party. That one. Being real careful with the ALGO here. The first one's doing okay, but anyway, God bless y'all. I will link to video 3 right here somewhere on the screen, and if you missed video 1, the playlist is at the bottom. Have a great night. Peace out. Love you. God bless. Thanks for watching. See you next time.